I think that DPOs are also notoriously, at least so far, inexperienced software buyers. And I don't think people talk about that very much. If privacy pulled to its natural kind of conclusion, it would necessitate a level of access control that nobody has ever built in their products before. People undervalue and don't connect the dots that like the respecting someone's choice doesn't stop at the website or the app.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, we're starting today a series on privacy tech, which will be scattering throughout the feed in coming weeks, interviewing founders or leaders of some of the most prominent software as a service vendors for privacy program management, DSAR automation, CMPs, data flow mapping, ROPA, AI governance, code scanning, and more. With us today, kicking it off, is Max Anderson, who is founder and head of product at San Francisco-based Ketch. Max is a seasoned product executive. I share with him a background in marketing technology. As prior to Ketch, Max was the director of product management at Krux, which was a DMP, and was acquired by Salesforce. After that, he ran data privacy and consumer identity products at Salesforce, including the rollout of their GDPR solution set. Prior to Krux, Max was a product manager at IPG Mediabrands, where he was responsible for multiple successful advertising measurement products. With him, we'll study the practical case for combining CMPs, or consent management platforms, and DSR, or Data Subject Access Request, automation under a single technical solution or software provider. We will try to understand the struggles of DPOs or CPOs today when putting together a privacy program. And I've also asked him about capabilities that he thinks are overvalued or undervalued in privacy tech, in a way, building on top of our interview with Andy Dale last week. Let's go for it. Max, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be on the line.
Well, thank you. So, what challenges do you see that DPOs, CPOs struggle with most, right, when deploying a privacy program?
Boy, we only have 25 minutes, huh? Look, it's not an enviable position, actually, as I try to be empathetic to somebody in that role. I mean, it happened to me. I wasn't exactly the DPO, but I just remember when I started out and was given the project of GDPR compliance for the marketing cloud at Salesforce, I actually thought I was some sort of a scapegoat. It was like, how could I possibly do this? It felt so consequential, but so ambiguous. And I was a product person, and so I knew how things worked. DPOs have no clue more often than not. And it's not an enviable position. And then, of course, no budget. You try to talk to the practitioners in the organization, and they're like, "Yeah, go away." It's a tough role. So I would say, the first thing for me is a little bit of compassion for anyone who's taking that on. I think the biggest challenge is budget is a big one. People talk about it all the time, so it's a little bit of a played out trope. So we can just agree and move on. I think that DPOs are also notoriously, at least so far, inexperienced software buyers. And I don't think people talk about that very much. right? So there's this thing that happens in software and it's sleazy and I've learned to accept it, but it's like, it's almost used car salesman-esque. It's like it's going to do all the things and fully loaded, and there's just that experience of selling and hearing a message. And if you're not an experienced buyer, you don't know how to push back, or you don't know how to ask the right questions that kind of level sets the whole conversation. And then of course you have your expectations. The laws say what they say, and a vendor should do those things. The reality is, if you just look at it from the market perspective, it's unrealistic to expect that any one vendor at this point in the journey is going to be outstanding at all of the things that you would want. I mean, if you unpack what software is, there's workflow automation. ServiceNow has made a very large business on just that alone. You've got you could think of it like experience management. CMSs live for exactly that purpose. You've got integrations that are, paramount to solving these problems. Integration platforms as a service are also standalone categories. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think the immaturity or the lack of experience in buying software also contributes to some of the challenges in deploying a program. And then maybe the last thing I would add is just a sense of ruthless prioritization. It's something that's very, it's part and parcel to be a product person. It doesn't feel like that's it's part of the mantra, but it doesn't always seem to rise to the top of like, no, I'm really actually not going to do this in the program because I need to do that. That seems to be something that, at least that I experience. You want the one trust, give me all 68 modules for $5,000 a year and, I'll solve my problem. And I think that's a big challenge that I see commonly.
It is true that it's very hard for them to buy technology, but I'm also thinking, since you have the experience, right, of having worked in the MarTech space as well, technical marketers believe in the magic. So in a way, it's easier to sell to them because they can believe in that dream of the customer 360 and the super predictable funnel, right? And so you would go to these Adobe events or Omniture events in Utah, in Salt Lake City, and people would fall so easily for this demo that was absolutely unreal, right? In the legal world, I would believe I would expect to find more skepticism. So
there is definitely more skepticism.
Right?
There's definitely more skepticism, but there's definitely it's an amazing point actually when you compare it to marketers. I loved selling to marketers. They're fun and risk taking, and it's just a totally different persona. And definitely legal practitioners can have elements of skepticism, but I think specifically in the context of like data mapping. For me, I think data mapping is the most notorious, like, of course, and it just works kind of story.
It's the wow effect, right? In display, the whole visual
in this space where people, I just think they lose their sense of rational skepticism, and they see a sunburst chart and they just lose it, and it's like that's the thing. So yeah, I take your point. I think definitely marketers are risk taking, and I have definitely seen people fall for some demoware in the marketing side of the house. But equally so, perhaps maybe it's just a human thing in the privacy world as well.
Yeah. Okay. So something you've said at some point, and I like this, is that you find it, I don't know if this is what you said exactly, right? That you find it frustrating to see that CMPs, that consent management platforms, and data subject rights management do not work in conjunction, right? Do not work well together, that people are sort of dealing with these things as separate building blocks.
I don't know. I mean, I've had a lot of strong opinions since starting the company. I've been humbled by the fact that none of them are, as prolific as I would have thought. They seem obvious to me. I thought purpose limitation, right? I thought I was super cool when I read about purpose limitation in the GDPR. And I was like, that is kind of the cornerstone of privacy, and it should endure all these laws. And while I think it does, I still think it's 2025 and people asking for a cookie banner. So we can maybe migrate to that in a moment later. But the thing I think is super interesting about DSR and CMP is it's really about the invocation method, not the thing. So like rights are afforded to subjects under law, but the means by which those rights are enacted or enabled or afforded to individuals, they might have different implementation patterns. So like a form to do not to opt out of the sale of personal information is whatever. It's common. And when we originally started satisfying that requirement at Ketch, I was pretty adamant that that wasn't a form thing. That was kind of like a CMP thing because it's effectively managing all of the advertising based options, and it felt natural over on this side of the aisle. And then of course customers with strong opinions, what do you do? So we ended up kind of building this kind of implementation pattern where they talk to each other. And so if I invoke on a form my right to opt out of sale of personal information, you would think that this thing over here, which turns advertising dials on and off, would have a tight coupling. And I go around the internet. I'm that guy who occasionally will invoke a right and just see how it works. And I feel dirty and awful for doing it, but I just want to understand. And there is no coupling that I observe. And recently, I mean, yesterday, right, the Honda settlement came out, and there was so much energy about, you ask for 10 fields and you only need 2. And it's like, if that's a criticism, it seems, or it stands to reason for me that naturally that conversation about the coupling between those two products will come to the fore.
I've said here many times, I'm not too happy with consent under the GDPR, right, as a legal basis, right? I think we abuse the legal basis. I hope we do more of the legitimate. I wish we were using legitimate interest a bit more in the EU, right? But it doesn't happen, and of course we've got the privacy directive, so everyone is pushed to requiring consent.
I just want to ask you one question on that topic. I promise we won't
please do.
Time on it. But so this is like such a deep. It's a big passion for me. Like there was a huge bet around purpose limitation at Ketch from the beginning, and it was the idea that like if privacy pulled to its natural kind of conclusion, it would necessitate a level of access control that nobody has ever built in their products before, right? Like you can use this category of information for this purpose, but not that category for that purpose. Oh, but this person said no, but that person said yeah. That's full row column level dynamic access control. And the technical constraints aside, I think it's very interesting. The one thing that when I got into market and started selling and was humbled, it was super interesting in Europe specifically, the emphasis on e-privacy, which I thought the relationship with GDPR would be different. I'm curious, just you being a scholar in the space, did e-privacy just completely trump GDPR and people lost sight of this concept of purpose limitation as written, or am I just misguided?
E-privacy has destroyed the practical application of the GDPR because e-privacy does not speak the language of legal basis. It only has one. It's binary.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel that with the advent of AI and software as a service becoming more and more commoditized, this is affecting you as well? So I'll tell you my perspective. I am helping small MarTech companies, right? Like A/B testing platforms, analytics platforms, sell and go through the DPAs and go through the audits, right, as data processors. And they are seeing the struggle. It's so hard to go through all these hoops that in the end, some companies are starting to build in-house because software as a service, again, becomes more and more risky. It's third parties that are always exposed to data breaches and so on. Do you feel that on the privacy tech space, you as a software as a service company as well?
I haven't felt it yet. I mean, certainly there are frequently companies that that have engineering teams that are, engineers are engineers. God bless them, right? So they want to go build these things, and we occasionally will encounter a team in the kind of build versus buy conversation, and I usually have a great opportunity to show someone all of the great expense it's taken to build this. And I'm sure, folks at Transcend or Data Grail or Big ID can have the same conversation. I mean, the whole way this economy works is based on, functional specialization. So, while I'm sure that there's a point of friction where certain things will become in-house more than others, I don't know that privacy is a primary top of the list candidate, just because we were talking earlier about budget. I can solve this problem cheaper than you can as a company with whatever engineers you have. And at the end of the day, we're seeing financial pressure equally. So I'm not seeing it yet. I'm sure it's to come in certain areas and perhaps privacy as well. But so far, it seems like this is not the primary, driver of reasons not to buy.
Good. Yeah, I'm only thinking last year at Pepper in Santa Clara, very close to you, the Airbnb team presented
Oh yeah.
a case where they had ended up developing their own CMP because they couldn't simply adapt, this big brand CMP.
Yeah, and there are going to be companies that always have, those types of constraints. I think that um, that's driven by two things. One, those are huge companies with strong engineering teams and very specific use cases and strong user experience teams. Um, of course. Two, let's just be honest about the state of consent management in this market. I don't think that there's a lot of down market and mid market players that deliver cookie banners. There are very few vendors. I do believe we are one of, if not the only, that focuses on consent management much more fundamentally, right? Cross device at the person level, like these types of constraints and considerations. It's not just an overlay, it can be embedded in the different context of your apps or properties, and it can be headless, API driven. If you have a solution like that, I think, it's been our experience. We've worked with those types of companies and nobody knows it's ours behind the scenes, but it helps expedite the developer experience. The majority of products on market are not going to work in that way. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that sophisticated companies like Netflix or Airbnb said, yeah, you know what? Gen 1 consent tools are adorable, but not for us.
So I keep hearing that we sell privacy tech because we want consumers to have a better choice. There's always going to be that sort of that speech, right, that we give to the world, that we give making the world better because people will have a better choice. The reality is that it is in our interest that people agree, that people consent, because you've been on the DMP side, right? You understand what CDPs need to do, what data clean rooms need to do, what people who upload data to a conversion API need to do, and you understand the other side, how to comply. So what are your thoughts about the trade-off between offering people meaningful choice to the point, to the extreme that they understand the risks so well, or maybe they understand the complexities so well, or maybe they do not understand anything, therefore there's so much complexity they do not want to agree to share any data. And the company, which really needs to go beyond a certain threshold, a certain consent rate, so that they can work with that data. How do you feel about the trade-off?
Yeah, that's a hard topic. I mean, look, I am not a privacy zealot. I'll just offer that up right now. I think that, I am fundamentally a believer in the positive power of data. I fundamentally got entranced early in my career at the cool things that you could do as a business with data and how you could generate better business outcomes as a result. I also personally benefit greatly from the relevant nudges that I get. I do think that right moment where I got the reminder from the company that I've engaged with in the past or that understands how to, I actually greatly appreciate that. And I think that, economies have to thrive. People have to make money. This is how our system works, whether we like it or not. So I don't think this is a turn it all off type game. I do think that it's silly to give someone a choice that isn't real, right? So what I see I think the most perilous position is the one that I most commonly see. It's this facade of privacy that doesn't actually do anything. If that's really what we're going to go do, and enforcement agencies, not to suggest that they're not doing it, but it has taken them some time. Much to my chagrin, it has taken longer than I would have expected to even start the party. But if enforcement agencies didn't do anything and we're all just pretending, might as well just go off and do something else with my life. And businesses should just get on, with their day to day. And lastly, I think it's important to always remember as a consumer, the value exchange here is material, right? The internet isn't free, content isn't free, and you're seeing this with the way publishers are showing up with paywalls. And I believe in competition. I believe that companies should be able to leverage data in a market to compete and deliver better services to customers. And I don't think that that's necessarily a Sophie's choice with businesses offering the option to opt out. Because I also think it's irrational that a business can follow me around, at least, in the advent of these new laws. So it's hard to have a single clear position. I believe in all of those things concurrently. I don't think that an opt-out regime makes that so bad. You look at the consent rates, it's not awful. But I do think that if I've been, there's a company that sends me emails. I opted into one of the creators in their network. and I notice they start sharing my email across all of the other creators in the network. I don't want that, and I'm glad that the law affords me the ability to say, yeah, you know what, I don't want that. I'm still waiting for the DPO to respond to my emails, but we'll see.
Thank you. Good. So I've heard some people saying that the future of CMPs is one where we do not bother people at the outset, but instead it becomes some sort of user-controlled, device-centric edge, system, which is closer to this real idea of zero-party data, where people really have these properties that they decide to share or not. Do you see an evolution towards that?
Man, I mean, that's the dream, right? When we started Ketch, and we spent many months thinking about how would we attack this problem and what would be the broader arc. And there was this dream we had in the outset called the personal data vault. And I did a lot of research, and actually, of course, this is not a new idea. I think on your side of the pond, they call it personal information management systems. There were a couple of companies that tried that.
Yeah. PIMS. Yeah.
Yeah, and they failed. And so one of the things that, and perhaps this is the right impetus to where the adoption could come, but the skepticism that we had at the time, and I'm not sure, I'm probably equally skeptical, partially hopeful, was that if you think about something like LastPass or just a password management system, there's some sort of akin or an analogy in terms of the friction it takes to adopt it and the value that it provides and the risk if you don't. So it's frictionful. Migrating everything to LastPass was an awful experience for me when, it first came out. But it had high risk. And it was valuable because, of course, there was high risk. When I think about like my privacy choices, am I going to do that? Maybe. I mean, certainly people have these extensions that they're enabling GPC with. It could get there. I think probably the intermediary step is progressive consent, which is mostly just don't beat them up at the beginning, but find a right value exchange moment and then do it overlay, because standards are hard. I mean, God bless the IAB, but in privacy, that as a standard has had challenges. You look at, these, legislation tries to enforce that there should be a standard, but will make no claims as to how it should work, and people aren't stepping up for how it should work. The last awesome standard that really was prolific was HTTP. So, I reserve some skepticism for whether or not we're going to get there. But that is the dream, and we'll see if we get there.
So when you look at the current privacy software market, what capabilities do you think are overvalued versus undervalued?
Yeah, I think people overvalue the data map in general, which I know that's probably very controversial. Because you talk to any privacy pro and they'll tell you the first thing I got to do is a data map. And I have compassion. I get it. And it's not necessarily one of the exclusion of the other, but then you ask like, well, how are you going to use it? And you ask 3-4 questions in, and it's very clearly there isn't as much thought put into how you'll operationalize your program around the data map. So much so that like we went on this crazy design spree that was intended to be okay, now we have a data map, and what? Do you want a risk register? Do you want action items for mitigating risks? Like, how do you actually pull the whole thing all the way through? And every single buyer was like, that's exactly how to solve the problem. No one's doing it, and I'm never going to buy it. I was like, cool. And now we're back to budget, and who knows what it is. But the point is, I think that data map certainly comes up to be the number one feature people ask for. But then you look at enforcement. Where is enforcement actually happening, and around what topic areas, right? It's not around your data map, man. It's around the fact that you don't even, necessarily connect the way you collect and use data to what you say you're going to do. And by the way, these enforcement agencies can only look at what's publicly available, unless, they take it to the next level, of course. So I just find it unconscionable that it's like, I need data map. Oh, and by the way, I need unstructured data, and I want you to go scan all the cat photos and make sure those are cataloged perfectly for $5,000 with the CMP or DSAR. Who cares? And I haven't looked at my privacy policy in 10 years. And I just find that prioritization kind of a little out of whack. So data map is, of course, interesting and important. It's a more expensive problem to solve really well than people think. But I don't think it should be, the first thing in the list if you haven't cleaned up the things that are actually going to get you dinged or, warrant a plaintiff's attorney to send you a demand letter, which is really what's driving a lot of the heartbeat right now in privacy. So that's overvalued. And I think undervalued is probably on the consent side. I think orchestration is well understood in DSR, kind of delete and access. But I think that on consent, people undervalue and don't connect the dots that like the respecting someone's choice doesn't stop at the website or the app, right? Blocking a cookie, we can have a long conversation about how silly that concept in and of itself is, or stopping data collection at the top or at the front is interesting. But in an opt-out regime, when I say do not use my personal information, don't sell it, stopping subsequent collection of data is interesting, but there is, whatever, a gigabyte of factoids in Facebook. And no buyer is like, yeah, how do you reach into Facebook and pull that out or augment the way that my marketing teams use Facebook? They just kind of like, yeah, whatever. And I just find that so bizarre. And I was grateful at the CLA this past couple of weeks ago, enforcement agencies from the CPPA were actually talking about, now you got to connect it all the way now. So it's been undervalued. Hopefully enforcement will make it more clear. But back to my main point, it's hard to tell if a company does that last mile because it's not observable from the front. So consistent with my argument, I can appreciate devaluing that, relatively speaking. But that, of course, would require someone to equally persuade themselves that data map isn't the only thing important in the program. So that's my long but hopefully thorough answer.
Thank you, Max. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's all for today. Follow us on Blue Sky and in the Masters of Privacy Altogether profile, you will find the starter pack, which includes the feeds of all of our past guests. There is also a Masters of Privacy LinkedIn channel, which I invite you to follow, where you will find links to our transcripts, cheat sheets, and other surprises every now and then. Our main website is mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.